Greetings! So in today's video, I want to take you through this little sketchbook that I got from Arrtx. So what we have here is a sketchbook from mixed pulp, so cellulose paper. It says applicable mediums: drawing pencils, sketching pencils, coloring pencils, and markers. It's 180 GSM and the size is 21 by 15 centimeters. It has 60 pages. The first thing I noticed about the sketchbook is that the surface is a bit shimmery. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on camera, but it has like a very subtle shimmer in the texture of the paper. And then you open it, and it's set very differently than the usual sketchbooks, in the sense that it's not bound by the thickness of the paper, it's bound by the last page. So as you can see here, this is not attached to the hardcover. We also get a folding pocket in the front. There you go. And yeah, the first thing I noticed is that the binding looks good, and it's really interesting setup for a sketchbook. So I wanted to experiment with it and try many different mediums in it. I was limited by what I have on hand, of course, but I'll take you through my tests with commentary, and hopefully it will help you decide if this is the kind of sketchbook that would work for you or not. First thing I did, of course, I went with the watercolor, surprising absolutely no one. So I did a sketch. I inked it with a waterproof pen, which is the Uniball Vision needle pen. And then I added some colors on top with some Cinity watercolors. Now, this particular binding, for me, feels kind of weird to draw on both sides of the sheets, which is something I usually do if you've seen my other sketchbooks. But I like that the back of the previous page can be used for swatches and tests. So this is the front page, so it's not necessarily the best example, but you'll see with following pages. It took the water quite well, considering that I went really hard on it with juicy washes, and it did buckle a bit, but not all that much considering. So that's good. Second page I decided to try with gouache. So again, that's a medium that requires a bit of water, but less than watercolor. And I think it worked really well with gouache. There was a bit of buckling, again, because like I said, I used like a water medium on this. But overall, I think it took to the gouache really well. And it was really handy to be able to swatch on the back of the previous sheet, which you can't really see from the front of this page. Next thing I tried was a Pilot parallel pen. So it's this pen here. As you can see, hopefully it has a wide tip. And it's really interesting for the gesture of inking and for sketches. It worked really well. I didn't notice any particular feathering like you would with other paper. However, I noticed a weird kind of effect. I don't know if you can see here. In some areas, the ink tends to travel just a little bit. So it makes for these sort of gray blotches. And there's a few of them like all over. And I'm not quite sure why that happens, but I feel like for sketching, it's not necessarily something that would be really problematic. Then, I'm sorry, these sketches are kind of terrible, but I wanted to try the sketchbook, and it was one of those weird art days. So for these, I used a pen directly too, but I used a Fude pen. So this is the pen. What's particular about a Fude nib is that it's bent. So it makes for a really interesting line when sketching. Also, we can see on the back of the previous page that the ink ghosts a bit, but didn't go through the paper. So again, this is another element to make this sketchbook a one-side only sketchbook, unless you really don't mind or you like to use the back of the page for swatches and tests. Then I tried with an 8B pencil. As you can see, the paper has a texture. It's a fine texture, but it's still there. And you can definitely see it with the pencil. I think there was a tiny bit of smudging too, but also I used an 8B pencil, so extra soft lead, which will smudge regardless of what you do. But it was a lot of fun to draw on this paper with the pencil because there's just enough tooth to be able to, you know, make interesting marks. When I draw with a very soft lead pencil, I'm not looking for details. I'm really looking for texture, gesture, and that kind of stuff. Next, I tried alcohol markers. So these were Copic markers and inked with a Pilot G2 pen. So these were just practice, but it was a lot of fun to use the alcohol marker on these sketches. I think it worked quite well. It didn't feather or like spread out too much. You can keep a good level of details in my opinion. And I really like the way the inks blended and layered. So the ultimate question with alcohol marker is how much does it go through the page? So if we turn to the next page and just for a moment focus on the back of the sheet, you can see that the ink went through in a few places but didn't straight out like bleed through, and there wasn't any imprint of ink on this page. Then again, I didn't use the ink very intensively, so perhaps if you layer a lot of alcohol ink, it's gonna really bleed through the paper. But aside from that, it was fairly compatible with the alcohol markers. Now this page I used acrylic paint pens. Again, I have kind of a limited range of these at the moment, so I used what colors I have, and for most of these I used reference photos, so just mentioning this in case you are curious about that. But I did a sketch in pencil and then went with the acrylic markers on top, and again it worked really well. You can see up close there is no pilling, there is no weird stuff happening with layering of the acrylic pens. It didn't damage the paper and didn't go through to the other page either. Now this page I used color pencil directly, coloring pencil. The ones I used were some vintage ones that I have that are from when I was a kid. I don't think the brand is really important here. As you can see, there's a fair amount of smudging that happened because, like I said, the paper is textured enough that it will smudge. I don't know if you can see here, but I erased a spot within the smudged area just to show the level of smudging. I still think it's a paper that works well with coloring pencils, but again, if you're looking for a really smooth application, then perhaps this is not the sketchbook for that. Otherwise, the texture can really add something interesting to your drawing. For this one, I went back with this pencil because I was thinking about the results I got on the first time I tried this one. And if we go back, this is the page, and on the previous page I had done a gouache sketch, and I was wondering if the fact that I used a water-based paint and medium here, what if the humidity was enough to go through the paper and then affect the page underneath. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna try another page of this pen, but on a new sheet of the sketchbook where I know that there hasn't been any interference. And also for this one and for many drawings before, I started using a pencil board. So basically it's this thin plastic sheet that you can put between pages so that if you press hard on your pencil or if you use something that will go through the paper, it doesn't affect the page underneath. I went really safe with this, like no water on this page and a pencil board to make sure that nothing was affecting this page. And I still got a few of the weird splotches. They are really minor. I don't think they would prevent me from using the sketchbook for ink, which is possibly what I'm going to do because I quite like how this paper takes the ink. It reminds me a bit of cartridge paper, if you're familiar with that paper. And that's it for my tests on this sketchbook. That's basically all the mediums I really use, especially ink and watercolor. So I wanted to be able to share this video sooner rather than later. So again, it's not extensive testing, but I will keep using this book, and once I'm done with it, I will do a full-on sketchbook tour like I usually do. I did try a few pens, which is something I often do on the last page. So you can see all the pens that I tried here. They all did rather well. I think the Pentel Pocket Brush is the one that did the worst. There's a fair amount of feathering on this paper. But aside from that, it's quite good. And you can see on the back that even the Sharpie didn't go through the paper. So that's good. Now, I have a few questions regarding my future usage of the sketchbook. First of all, as you can kind of see here, it gets a bit weird when you get further into, let's say, past the middle point of the sketchbook. Like if you get to the middle point, the sketchbook lays perfectly flat, and that's really nice. But as you get closer and closer to the end, like you start having a bit of an issue with the last few pages, which is really not that bad until you get to the last few pages where you get this really sharp bend in your paper. So that might make it a bit more difficult to use at the end. That might also means to just keep the last few pages for swatches and tests. So that way it's no big issue. I really like that it stays so flat and it's so nice. I'm also curious to see just how well the binding holds up to repeated like opening and scrolling and moving the pages around. Perhaps that's not the intent of this book. Perhaps this is meant more to be something that you can easily tear out pages and put them elsewhere or give them away or whatnot. These are the main two elements that I'm unfamiliar with and that I'm curious to see how it will evolve as I use more of the sketchbook. They also kindly sent me a set of pens. So we have a white, a silver, and a gold pen. Now, personally, I like to use this kind of pens for highlights, details, some sort of metallic effects on metallic bits and drawings. I haven't yet really tested them in the sketchbook. I will definitely keep them near me so I can test them as I continue using the sketchbook. As you can see, the white has a really nice opacity, and the silver is really super bright. So these are the two I'm particularly excited about. The gold is interesting because it feels like it's a similar formula to the silver, but with a yellow dye added in. So you kind of get this feeling that it's sort of a bit duotone. I feel like in some areas the silver kind of feels more present, because I figured that if you have the really opaque silver, like in the silver pen, with a yellow dye, the dye will go through the paper, will be transparent more. So in some areas, I feel like you see more of the silver go through the ink. But that's just my impression. I have no idea if that's what happens here. The pens are really nice. They work really well. And I think they will be really serviceable and fun to use on drawings. I will come back on these when I go through the sketchbook and do the tour when it's finished. But yeah, that's it for now. These are my initial impressions of the sketchbook. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on the sketchbook in the comments below, especially regarding the different layout and setup of this particular sketchbook with the lay flat binding and the way it's bound with glue instead of signature and all that. Again, thank you so much, Arrtx, for sending me these supplies to try out, and we will see each other in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.